Thank you. Thank you for Civita for hosting this breakfast, and also thank you to Efraim Gomez and Ian Martin for joining us this morning. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, she was unfortunately prevented from being here. She would really have loved to. So you will have to make do with a State Secretary. That's our job in life, to step in for the Minister at short notice. So on the downside, you only get the State Secretary, but on the positive note, I might say a bit more few crazy things than she could have said. That will be fine. It should come as no surprise that today's topic, a membership of the UN Security Council, is one of the key priorities for the Norwegian government in the years to come. So let me start by answering the question posed for this breakfast meeting. Should Norway seek a seat in the Council? My answer is a very clear and loud yes, and I'm going to explain why I think so. Since its establishment, Norway has been a very consistent pillar of support for the United Nations and the rules-based international order. Norway has a fundamental interest in a well-functioning global order where right prevails over might. It's in our national interest that relations between states are governed by binding standards, by rules, by conventions. And for the last 75 years or so, it's been great to be a small country. A small country with an open, market-based economy has had a great time, and this includes Norway. Our economy has grown thanks to international trade rooted in multilateral agreements. Our right to explore oil and gas resources in our seabed has been protected by international law through a UN convention. Our pension fund, the oil fund, relies on well-functioning global capital markets and enjoys global financial stability provided by cooperation across borders. For Norway, I would say that multilateralism has been like hitting 7 right numbers in the lotto every Saturday for the last 75 years or so. It's been our golden ticket. But now, today, we see that multilateralism is under pressure. And it's increasingly important that we stand up for the UN and international cooperation. A multilateral system cannot work if countries behave as free riders. We all need to continue defending, reforming, strengthening, and most importantly, participate in the system and the institutions that we have all benefited from. Being a member of the Security Council will give us a unique platform to influence how the Council works and make sure it fulfills its role as an international peace and security forum. It's the ultimate forum for those questions. And it's certainly the case that most of the conflicts on the Security Council's agenda takes place quite far away from Norway. The agenda is dominated by conflicts in Africa, in the Middle East, but this does not mean that the Security Council is irrelevant for us. In an interconnected world, the consequences of violent conflict are extending far beyond the battlefield. Migration, violent extremism, transborder crime are some of the possible effects of warfare and instability, not to mention the grave humanitarian consequences of those conflicts and for the people involved. So no country is immune. Even if conflicts are far away geographically, they can have an immediate impact on Norway and our welfare. One example is the migration situation in 2015, which had serious consequences for Norway, which stemmed from an issue in the Middle East. And in 2013, when our government took office, we kind of thought that Europe was a safe place, a very peaceful continent, and then just a few months after the elections in 2013, we had the situation in the Ukraine, which shows that also in our immediate neighborhood, there are security issues and security concerns. So I think it's vital that countries like Norway should be present at the table when binding decisions on war and peace are being made. The issues at stake are critical, and it's too important to leave them for others to decide. I can admit, and in this world, there's a lot of talking clubs for diplomats. There's many of them, but the Security Council is perhaps the one that we can clearly say is not a talking club. It's the only international format or meeting place where you can make binding decisions, legally binding decisions regarding war and peace. So our process for the Security Council campaign, it has started. It will be a big diplomatic effort going into 2021 when we start our period. It will extend further because diplomacy is important if we're going to be a member. And investing in diplomacy today is a very wise choice. Traditional allies are changing their priorities. New global actors with different values than us are becoming more powerful. And we need to expand our partnership and work broader globally to uphold our liberal values. So the UN Security Council will be a platform for us to continue fighting for what we believe in and to contribute constructively to international peace and security. It will be a very tough race. We have good competitors, Canada and Ireland. Canada is an ally. Ireland is a part of the same economic area as us. So there's a number of good candidates running for the Council, and that's a sign of strength. But that being said, I think Norway has the experience, capacity, and policies that will serve the Security Council particularly well. We have a history of speaking with an independent voice. We have repeatedly seen that small countries working together can achieve a lot when it comes to forging diplomatic solutions and creating new ways. Norway also brings to the table more than 25 years of experience from peace and reconciliation efforts all around the world. We have the credibility to build a cross-regional relationship. We've been playing the part of bridge builder between developing countries and developed countries for many years, and we can really be a constructive problem solver. Sweden has clearly demonstrated when they were on the Council how smaller elected member states can work together and achieve some real important impact. And Efraim will be talking about that later. And we really want to, in a sense, pick up the mantle from Sweden's membership and show that small member states also can engage the big ones. I say when we're elected to the Security Council, because I'm being an optimist, of course, our main priority will, of course, be dealing with the issues that are on the Council's agenda, meaning conflicts and things that will happen in the world. But we really aim to be listening to other countries, working to find common solutions with other member states, and also improving and reforming the United Nations themselves. We intend to work closely with civil society in Norway to bring all the voices aboard our Security Council campaign, and I'm also very eager to listen to your views on our campaign. If you have visited the Ministry of Foreign Affairs lately, you will see that we are all in campaign mode. We have chosen a campaign color, which is it's pink. This is the necklaces that we are wearing these days. It's a very visible color. It's almost a bit like doing a Norwegian election, except that instead of going on dørbank, you are actually going to meet ministries of foreign affairs to present your case. But apart from the bright colors, there's very little new about our campaign. In fact, you might even call it a bit dull. We're not launching new policies. We're not changing who we are. We're not giving up on our principles to secure a vote. On the contrary, we believe that the strength of our campaign is that we are consistent. We are consistently supporting international principles, and we are consistent in our commitment to human rights and other issues that's important to Norway. I can tell you, in meetings I've had with my colleagues around the world, I might have spent 75% of a meeting complaining about the human rights situation in that country, about their lack of doing anything with the corruption, being a bad guy for 75% of the time, and then transitioning into talking about the Security Council. And it works well. It's possible to have your principles still in place, while also engaging and promoting the Security Council seat. Norway has always been a strong supporter of a rules-based multilateral order. I think we will be elected because Norway remains the same. We represent what Norway has always represented. Anything else, it wouldn't be credible, and it would make us less electable if we were to create a lot of new initiatives and change our policies. So right now we are trying to show the world what we stand for and what we have been standing for many decades on human rights, on our very substantial development cooperation, which we have been going on for many decades, our engagement for peace and reconciliation, very familiar topics for Norwegian foreign policy across many decades. And if we manage to get this message across, I think we have a very good chance of being elected to the Security Council. It's, first of all, because I think we would make a valuable contribution to the work in the Council, and secondly, because it's strongly in Norway's national interest that we have a well-functioning multilateral system. I mentioned in the opening of my remarks that the age of multilateralism has been a golden age for Norway, and I really think we need to keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Jens Holte. Now I give the floor to Ian Martin, please.
Good morning. It's always a pleasure for me to come to Oslo. I started working for the United Nations in the early 1990s from a civil society background after I had been Secretary General of Amnesty International, and my work for the UN has almost all of it been in the field, in human rights missions or peace operations. And I gained great respect for Norway's role in promoting peace and reconciliation and human rights in the various contexts in which I worked. But then for 3 years, ending last year, I was in New York reporting on what was going on in the Security Council through the organization's Security Council report. And in those 3 years, I also saw the very positive role that Norway was playing at the UN from outside the Security Council, not just as a major contributor to humanitarian and development work of the UN, but through mobilizing cross-regional support for UN reform and the agenda for the new Secretary General, in implementing the recommendations, a review of United Nations peace operations, of which I had been a member. And indeed, the existence of the organization I headed, Security Council report, was in part owed to Norway's last term on the Security Council in 2001 to 2002, and its commitment to transparency and its belief that there needed to be an institutionalized way of making what goes on in the UN Security Council more accessible to civil society, to other member states, and so on. So for me, Norway is a pillar of principled multilateralism, and I'm certain that Norway can again play an extremely valuable role on the Council if elected for 2021-22. The Security Council is not doing well, let's be frank about that. But that simply makes the quality and the role of the elected members of the Security Council all the more important given the performance of the Council. The Security Council, in my view, has 3 very big handicaps. One is a handicap of legitimacy. Everybody knows that the current composition of the permanent members of the Council does not represent today's geopolitics, and I say that as a UK citizen. There isn't going to be an early change in the composition of the Security Council for reasons we could discuss. In that context, it's all the more important that the Council reaches out to emerging powers and underrepresented regions. That's not the default position of the permanent members. It therefore depends very much on the elected members playing the role that they are elected by the full membership to play and being a bridge to that membership. The second problem are the deep political divisions in the Security Council. We had a nice period after the end of the Cold War where we thought those divisions that had crippled the Council during the Cold War had gone away. They're back in some of the same and some different ways. Classically, the inability of the Council to reach any political agreement regarding Syria, with 12 vetoes in the Council, is the most obvious case, and sometimes those divisions spill over from situations where there are very obvious major stakes of the permanent members, Syria, Ukraine, onto other aspects of the Council's agenda. And again, it requires the elected members to help the Council to transcend those divisions and find where it can take effective action. The third handicap is the way the Council functions with the domination of its 5 permanent members. And if Norway comes onto the Council in 2021, it will find that in the 20 years since it was on the Council before, in some ways, the permanent members have closed down the space for elected members, and the extent to which, particularly the 3 permanent Western members, dominate country situations through something that's called the penholder system has got worse. But the good news is that there has been a very determined pushback against that by the 10 elected members in recent years. And now the elected members are functioning much more together to insist that they have a full right to their role as members of the Council. And Norway will indeed be in a position to pick up the baton from Sweden. Sweden, to some extent, picked up the baton from New Zealand, but it's not only members of the Western group. It's been a cross-regional effort by elected members who, despite political divisions, are now functioning as a group to insist that the Council functions in such a way that the divisions of the 5 permanent members don't result in paralysis. And we can talk a bit about some of the concrete achievements that has led to. While the Council was blocked for political action on Syria, it was elected members who opened up humanitarian issues and have succeeded in getting the Council to authorize cross-border humanitarian operations into Syria and at least have mitigated some of the consequences of that terrible conflict. It was elected members who ensured that there was at last some Council action on Palestine, on settlements in the occupied territories at the end of 2016, when the Obama administration was prepared to let that happen, although we won't find the Trump administration allowing it to happen. It was elected members, and again, I have to pay tribute to Sweden, not because Efraim is here, but just out of objective truth. It was Sweden, with other elected members, that pushed the UK, my own country, which, because of its alliance with Saudi Arabia and its support for the coalition action in Yemen, was frankly obstructing the Council from doing what it ought to have been doing to try to bring that conflict towards an end. It was elected members that negotiated a resolution to protect health, the personnel and facilities for health in conflict situations at a time when 4 of the 5 permanent members were associated one way or another with the bombing of health facilities in Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, and particularly close to my heart as someone who's been responsible for Security Council mandated peace operations, elected members who are trying to get better strategic discussion on one of the most important things the Council does, which is mandates and manages and oversees peace operations in the field. Two final points. You can't care about development without caring about conflict. All the information tells us that the thing that most cripples the possibilities of development is conflict. And therefore you can't care about aid without caring about the efforts of the United Nations to prevent conflict and bring an end to conflict situations. And that is one of the reasons why so many of the situations on the Council's agenda are conflicts in Africa. And secondly, there was a period when it became a cliche to say that the Council no longer has to worry about interstate conflict, which is what brought the United Nations into being. It's now mostly focused on internal conflicts. Well, if only we could rely on that always being true. Not only do those internal conflicts spill over, spill out through terrorism, and the role of the Council in combating terrorism is important, but we have, in a way, seen the return of the nuclear threat. We may be a bit more relaxed about North Korea now than we were before the first Trump-Kim meeting. The Iran nuclear deal is where it is. Kashmir is reminding us of what can happen if two nuclear-armed powers are in conflict. The problems in the South China Sea loom ever more seriously on the horizon. I'm afraid the very reasons why the Security Council was created remain relevant, and the importance of countries which are adherents of principled multilateralism and have strong diplomatic resources and bilateral relations is going to be enormously important in the time ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Efraim Gomez, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Erik. Good morning, everyone in the audience, and particular thanks to the organizers, Civitas, for hosting us. And it's always a pleasure to come to Oslo and speak on things that we feel dearly about. I can say that I worked with our campaign when we had a campaign between the years 2014 to 2016. And then I worked on our term in the preparations, but also the execution of our membership in the Security Council. And now we're trying to wrap it up. And so it's a great moment for us to be here to share experiences with Norway. And I could start there maybe because the support that we got from Norway throughout our campaign, but also throughout our membership, has been hugely important for us. Erik, in the preparation of this event, you sent us a question and you asked, is it important for Norway? Why is it important for Norway to sit on the Council? And as a diplomat, you should be humble about having opinions about what other countries should have as foreign policy. But I can answer that question, and that's it. Hugely important for Sweden that Norway sits on the Council, and for other Nordic countries. And I would say for Sweden, it's particularly important that Norway sits on the Council, because we're so alike when it comes to the business of the Council and how we approach peace and conflict and security. And so for us, it would be a tremendous asset to have Norway on the Council. But I would speak a bit about the results and the importance of our own Security Council membership. And the first important point for us has been the results, what we've achieved in the Council. Axel, Ian spoke a bit about them. But of course, holding the humanitarian torch in Syria, making cross-border aid possible for millions of Syrians, that matters. We were able to restart having a more responsible Council action on Yemen. We were able to put Myanmar on the agenda of the Council. It was only ad hoc until then. Now it's firmly based on the Security Council's agenda. We were able to support also positive developments on the Korean Peninsula, but also the Horn of Africa. And I would also say that we've, when it comes to integrating the perspectives that are important for us, for Norway and Sweden, such as women's and girls' participation in peace and security, we were able to make a qualitative shift in the way that we introduced and integrated this in the business of the Council. It's core peace and security business to strengthen the voice of women and girls in peace and conflict. And we were also able to reboot the work that we do on children and armed conflict back to a place where it's more productive. And that is something we often talk about, prevention of conflicts. Well, if you protect the children of today, chances are you're preventing the conflicts of tomorrow. That was the whole philosophy underpinning our strong commitment on this. And then the big question of our generation, the next ones, climate change. We're able to introduce language and also integrate the perspective of climate change and security. those are poised to increase in the near future. And also here, Norway's credentials are outstanding when it comes to dealing with all of these issues. And you have such a strong vertical and horizontal strengths in the business of the Council that I'm sure that you would outperform even our term in the Council. But there's a second importance to our membership too, and that is it's trained our foreign service. When you deal with the permanent members, and you have to deal with them because otherwise you won't prevail in anything in the Council, you're able to have a more sophisticated relationship with them, and it's possible to do business with them. And that is something that is important for a small country that is dependent, just as Axel mentioned, on international cooperation for its well-being and welfare. And for Sweden, for instance, also the EU presidency is usually also one of those moments when we train our foreign service. But we need to. We're dependent on multilateral work. The third important issue, or the third importance of our membership has been that we've been able, in a more profound way, to promote the values and principles that we believe in. That's also important today. There are competing development narratives or paradigms in today's world. And we were unaccustomed to this during the golden years of golden era of multilateralism, but that's the truth. And so we need to show that we need to make the case compelling for human rights, humanitarian law, humanitarian perspective, gender equality, etc. That matters also. And a fourth importance is, of course, that we boosted the elected members. And I would say, point critically here that for Sweden, it's been very important to strengthen the cooperation between the European EU members of the Council. But post-Brexit, I believe that the European caucus, more widely speaking, will also be important because of the things that unite us in Europe when it comes to values and principles. And it's been a requested voice in the Council too. When other of the permanent members are rescinding their responsibility, including on Middle East, having a European voice, Nordic voice, on those issues is something that the wider membership of the United Nations is really in demand of. And fifth, we strengthen the institutions. And institutions, they are for us. They're not for the big countries. But we need to invest in the institutions. Politics only happens when you do it. And it's the same with international cooperation and also with institutions. And so you can't point to someone else and say, oh, by the way, you'll have to deal with you're the one who's supposed to be the caretaker of these institutions, and I just draw on you opportunistically when it benefits me. No. You need to be solidaric and with institutions, because at some point you might need them yourself. And so, Eric, you also asked us, is there an opportunity for Norway to shoulder its international responsibilities? But of course it is. It's a unique opportunity for Norway, and I think that your credentials, I think when Sweden was elected in June 2016, there was almost like a collective sigh of relief, because people felt that the right country was elected to the Council on merits, which isn't often the case. But I would say we're dwarfed by your merits, I would say, when it comes to peace and conflict in the last 20 years or so. So I think that you would find it equally important and rewarding to sit on the Council, and that the wider membership of the UN will also like to see you sit on the Council. There's also this question of whether it's worth it in terms of resources. I could think of, there are few investments that yield such tremendous returns, I would say. First, because it's able to multiply the impact and effect of Swedish multilateral or development cooperation, generally speaking. Why should we leave a walkover to other countries to decide how the international engagement in Afghanistan, Syria, Mali, South Sudan, Colombia should look like, when we invest so heavily of our own bilateral development cooperation in those countries? We should have a say about that. And the second one is, of course, is it, like you pointed to also, Axel, is it worth it in terms of, is it really a useful investment in terms of the forum where you sit? Well, if you're going to spend resources, and you're going to anyway in your foreign service, it's better than to spend them on having opinions, is spending them on deciding on issues. And that's what you do in the Security Council. So in all aspects of the of work, and I would say also the approach, and we have such a close rapport together with our colleagues here in Oslo, I would say that you're on a very good path, convincing path to your membership, and also the way that you are approaching your candidacy is something that you will also benefit from once you sit in the Council, and we're quite confident that you will do that. There have been questions in Sweden too about the utility of our, first, the way that we conducted our campaign. There were questions, are you tinkering with sort of established principles of Swedish foreign policy? We got very good advice from other European countries who had run in the past. There's no point in trying to hide who you are. And I can say this because our Prime Minister, one of his first visits he did outside of Sweden, when he was on the campaign trail to try to make our candidacy known, he went to the AU summit, the Summit of African Union in Addis Ababa in January 2015. And he met, depends on how you count, it's the second or third most populous state in Africa. And in his first bilateral meeting, and it's a tough cookie, the counterpart that he met, in his first bilateral meeting, he opened up and said, I'm Stefan Löfven, I'm Prime Minister of Sweden, I'm a welder by profession, and I lead a feminist government. And then he started talking about the civil society legislation that was just enacted in the country, and which was quite draconian. But he also eventually talked about the candidacy, because that's how you do. And that's how you win the confidence, and also that's how you're effective in the Council, I would say. By staying true to your principles, you will make other countries they will feel discomfort on occasions about your positions, but they can trust you. And that creates political capital that you're able to spend also in the Security Council. So I'm quite sure that Norway will do the same, and is doing the same, during its campaign phase, and also during its much-awaited membership. Thanks.
Thank you so much for great introductions and great insights. We will very shortly open up for questions from the audience, so if you want to take the floor, just raise the hand. But while you're registering for the speakers list, I have an opening questions, and I want to continue where Efraim Gomez left. In the UN, you both have democratic and non-democratic states. Some say that it's the beauty of the UN, and it's also the challenge of the UN. So, Jens Holt, if I start with you, how important is it for Norway to promote human rights and democratic values, and how possible is it if you also want to have the support of, what should we say in a diplomatic voice, non-democratic regimes, and regimes you don't share so many values with?
Well, you said that in the UN there is democratic and non-democratic states, but in the world in general there's democratic and less democratic states. And we need to relate to the world as it is, and not as we wished it would be. So I mean, as I also mentioned in my opening statement, we're not changing our positions when we go into meetings with other countries with less democratic credentials. We are still quite clear on criticizing human rights violations, electoral fraud, or illegitimate elections. I say one example of that is Venezuela, where we have strongly criticized the legitimacy of the elections, the elections that led Maduro to power, which was, I mean, his power was illegitimate, and we say that very openly. And then we, of course, when you're a country, you have to relate to other countries in a way, but we are not changing our way of interacting.
Before I move on to Ian Martin, just since you mentioned Venezuela, Jens, some say that Norway has been less critical of Venezuela now than other European countries and US.
That's not right. I mean, neither European countries nor Norway has the tradition of recognizing governments. We recognize states. So we are fully supporting Guaidó and his work to getting new elections, and equally criticizing Maduro for having illegitimate power since the elections were not done rightly.
Ian Martin, what's your take on how you're going to approach democratic and non-democratic states? Is it important for democratic states like Norway, Sweden, UK to use the Council to promote human rights and democratic values?
It's hugely important. When I first worked for the UN in the 1990s, having come, as I said, straight from Amnesty International, you couldn't talk about human rights in the Security Council. Despite the obvious relationship between human rights and peace and security, it was off limits. Since then, things have changed enormously. The post of High Commissioner for Human Rights didn't exist at that time. There was a long battle to ensure that the High Commissioner was able to brief the Security Council, and that human rights information was in front of the Council when it was considering country situations. The Council then went on to give almost every operation it mandated in the field a human rights mandate. There's a pushback. There's been some regression, and Sweden has had to fight China, say, to ensure that the human rights reality of Myanmar is part of the discussions in the Council. But again, that just makes it all the more important that the countries that are prepared to stand for principles of human rights are there in the Council.
Efraim Gomez, is it easier to talk about and promote human rights and democratic values today than it was like 5-10 years ago in the Security Council?
Well, I don't know if it's. I don't know. Probably not. I would say, but I mean, it's that makes it, as Ian says. I mean, that makes our responsibility to do so even greater. And I think we also need to be more sophisticated in our way that we argue for human rights and how we approach this, because you can't. You have to also see sort of the totality of how you promote human rights for the beneficiaries of our work. They are not in New York or usually in Stockholm or in Oslo, but they're actually people who are at risk or in conflict. And there are many ways that you can achieve this. By creating pressure in the Security Council is one of those. But you can be smart about how you do it too. One of Sweden's first experiences on the Council, we entered as, and we had the presidency in January 2017, was the crisis in the Gambia. Not many people remember it now, but it was very important for us then. And it was, we were able to adopt a resolution that was just sprayed with the language on democracy and human rights, etc. Now, there are a couple of permanent members who probably cried when they read the resolution, but they had to accept it because we've worked our way through African Union and ECOWAS, the regional organization, and we're able to adopt a good resolution that has put Gambia on the right path.
I haven't noticed anybody wanting to come on the speakers list so far, but normally it's everybody wants to come at the end, so I urge you to be sooner rather than later. I have another question, as you touched upon in your introduction, Jens. You have fierce competition from Canada and Ireland, and in many ways you could say many of the same things probably about Canada and Ireland in terms of promoting human rights and democratic values. So what separates Norway from the other candidates, and why do you think we will win?
Well, we will win because Norway is a consistent partner for the multilateral system, and we speak with an independent voice. That's our, in a sense, campaign slogans. And from politics, we know it's very important to keep talking about your campaign slogans all the time, in every sentence. So, you know, when you are tired of saying your campaign slogans, then you have gotten somewhere. So, so that's the two main points that we're talking about. Canada and Ireland are friends, allies. I mean, we do have a great relationship with them, but in our opinion, we have more to bring to the table, and we really, yeah, as I said, being a small country in a big world, it's important that we step up to the responsibility and also participate in the global system.
Well, Martin, you're not Norway, so you can see this a little bit more objective. Who do you think will win the final seat at the Security Council?
It's the kind of question I get asked every year when I was at Security Council report and never answered, partly because I genuinely don't know. I mean, the process of election is a very unsatisfactory process in many ways, and almost every country that runs for the Council ends up having more pledges than they end up with votes. The total number of pledges adds up to more than the number of voting member states. I think Sweden did a pretty good job of predicting where they were going to end up, but you have to ask Efraim how they did it. Really, my job is not to predict, and it's certainly not my job to talk down either Ireland or Canada, which have distinguished records in the UN. What I can tell you is that I think Norway would be a very good Security Council member, and I think the quality of elected Security Council members is enormously important in the context that we're in.
Efraim, your take. Who's going to take the next seat?
Well, I'm uber certain that Norway will claim its seat, not only because of its merits, but but also because the membership will want Norway to sit on the council. I strongly believe this, and also, of course, through the help of Nordic countries and others that will route for you. We will continue to do that, and I think also the strong sense also among sort of stakeholders that have in the business of the council, civil society, women's rights group, etc. They would surely like to see Norway on the council.
First question, I noticed, was the gentleman sitting there. Before you take the floor, just let me repeat the speakers list. I also noticed the woman sitting right in the end, the gentleman sitting there, and the woman on the second row. First, present yourself and speak into the microphone.
My name is Björn Amland from Development Today. I have a question.
Even closer.
Yeah, I have a question concerning reforming the UN Security Council. What is Sweden's experience from your time at the Council when it comes to promoting reforms, and to what extent is this part of the Norwegian campaign?
Well, direct question to you, Efraim Gomez.
I mean, there's, I'll maybe Ian, if you want to compliment, he's an expert on Security Council reform, and he's and the Security Council report is actually one of those that have helped us in practice to do Security Council reform. The most ambitious one is the composition of the Council and the veto power. But there's so much you can do all the way to contain sort of the veto creep that we've seen, which is paralyzing the UN system, etc. in practice through the working methods and by strengthening critically the elected members. That's a way of doing reform in practice, and also opening up the Security Council, which we've done. We've had the first time gender parity among the briefers of the Security Council during Sweden's presidency in July 2018. We've seen civil society representatives coming to the Council. That matters to reform the Council. But of course, I mean, there's no way around the fact that the Council is not legitimate in today's world when it comes to power relations in today's world. And
Ian Martin, let me follow up with a question to you. In an ideal world, how would the Security Council look like? How would you form it if you were to start today?
I mean, one would ensure that there was a much more balanced representation of regions. I mean, Africa clearly has an overwhelming case that they're underrepresented, and so too is Asia, despite the presence of China as a permanent member. One would also, or I would strongly argue, that one needs a longer term than 2 years for non-permanent members of the Council, assuming that there are still permanent and non-permanent members, because the biggest sort of disadvantage of the elected members is that you know, they come on without a strong institutional memory from the last time they served on the Council. And again, that's something that an organisation like Security Council Report tries to mitigate by serving to some extent as an institutional memory that can then be shared with new elected members. But the problem is, I mean, the problem about reforming the composition of the Council is not just that the existing permanent members would be reluctant to see it happen, or one can question how far, when they say they're in favour of Security Council reform, as the UK and France certainly say they're sincere in that. The problem is that there simply is deep disagreement amongst the membership in each region as to how and who would benefit from a reform. I hope to see a day when world leaders invest serious political capital in trying to reach some compromise around reforming the Security Council, because it isn't going to happen as a result of the annual sort of diplomatic dance around the discussion in New York. But in the meantime, that's not the only meaning that you can give Security Council reform, as Efraim has rightly said. Reforming the way the Council functions is seriously possible in the kind of instances he's given and I've given, what we call the working methods of the Council, and the elected members seeing it as their responsibility to be a bridge to the wider membership and as I said, underrepresented regions and emerging powers.
Jens Holte, what's Norway's take on institutional reforms, and how can we contribute if we're elected?
Well, first of all, as Efraim and Jens said, we will be trying, first of all, to reform the way the Council is working, being more open, including more voices, and also working with the elected members. And of course, we do not know yet who will be the other 10 elected or 9 elected members, but this will be countries that we have to work very closely with and try to reform the way we work in the Council. When it comes to representation, we are in favor of expanding the geographical representation of the Security Council in order for it to reflect to a greater extent the power balances of today and increase the legitimacy of the Council, although I can openly admit it's an uphill battle, but it's our position.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Medlem. I'm a student in international relations at the University of Oslo. And following this debate, it seems apparent that you all agree Norway should have a place in the Security Council. And to me, that seems natural, given that we have a choice between making decisions or letting others make decisions for us. And therefore, my question is, why wouldn't we? Is it very expensive to be part of the Security Council? Is the campaign expensive? What would opponents of the Security Council say?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure, Jens, if you have the budget here. I'm not sure if this is going to make you re-elected in 2021 to get a seat here. Is it very important for voters, most voters in Norway?
It depends. I mean, support for the UN is strong in Norway. Support for multilateralism is strong. I think it's the concept of international cooperation. It's a bit under attack. You see certain political parties opposed to international collaboration doing quite well on the polls right now. So it fits into a debate on international cooperation versus nationalist orientations, which is quite in the times. But when it comes to costs, of course it has a price, and of course it's a part of our day-to-day diplomacy to promote the Security Council candidacy. But we are going to publish numbers and be very transparent about how we count, because it's important to show accountability to voters.
How was this debate in Sweden? Were there any reactions, strong reservations internally in Sweden against Sweden seat at the Security Council?
There are always questions surrounding cost of diplomacy, I would say. But of course, when you run a campaign and then when you sit in the membership, and then it's something that catches the attention of the general public, certainly. But the Swedish candidacy costed 0.3% of our totality of the foreign service, and so I think it was quite a modest investment in relatively. And as I mentioned, you have to calculate the returns too. It's not just a cost; it's a benefit for your country, benefit for your development cooperation, and benefit for your foreign service that you will that is of importance.
Ian Martin, you followed Security Council for quite a time. Is it expensive? Are there a lot of waste, or are there room for, how do you say, some cuts and some more effective way of running the Security Council?
No, I mean, clearly it requires a significant strengthening of the diplomatic presence in New York to participate in the council. I mean, I'm talking beyond the campaign. I mean, once a country is on the council. But I mean, there's no doubt that hugely strengthens a country's diplomatic presence as it's perceived by other countries. It strengthens the relationship between the country and countries where there are peace operations, for example. So I mean, you know, you're the ones representing governments who have to strike that balance of. But it seems to me that the resources are, frankly, relatively minor compared with the very major payback in terms of a country's international relations.
Next question. Before you take the floor, just want to repeat the speakers list. I noticed the lady sitting there and the lady sitting just in front, and there's also room for others to register for the speaker list. But remember, time moves fast towards 9:15. Please.
Yes, my name is Gunnar Solem, and I'm the chairman of the Norwegian Heat Pump Association. And both Swedish and Norwegian share the idea that equality between the sexes has a value in itself and helps democracy and economic development. So my question to our Swedish friend is, what did you manage to achieve on the Security Council in that respect during your 2 years? And the question to our Secretary of State is, what do you aim to achieve on that field during our hopeful representation in the Security Council?
Excellent question. Efraim Gomez.
Thanks. I think in the beginning when we started, we had a very high ambition when it comes to women, peace and security. And we also chaired the informal experts working group on this, and our foreign minister actually visited the working group, which was quite unusual, in order to ramp up support for this agenda. But we set ourselves a target. We would not have any more thematical debates solely, or talk about the gender equality in principle. We would do it in practice, so you integrate the perspective. That usually is not perceived as something that is politically so sexy, but it's something that actually matters in practice. And I think, I mean, the most efficient, if you're doing gender equality inside a national government, probably the most important, apart from the Prime Minister being a convinced feminist or gender equalist, is the Finance Minister. And so that's the same philosophy that we had, you know, that you integrate and that you target resources, accountability, reporting. And we managed this to be more specific and also to triangulate or verify the information that we requested from the field in order for us to target more and to have more targeted requests and recommendations and advice coming from the Security Council and introduce it in the mandates of the different missions. That has been particularly important for us. And eventually, when we left the council, we were quite a few more countries and members of the Security Council who actually usually took up the issue and were ready to invest more in it. And you could also see that a couple of the special representatives or heads of missions, when they came to New York, they felt compelled to explain how they are working with this topic, which wasn't always the case before. And a lot of the products, I think we have some sort of numerical achievements too. All of the presidential statements included some language on women, peace and security in 2017, etc. But all of the negotiable mandates of UN missions today include tasks when it comes to women and peace and security. So that's a clear achievement.
Jens?
Yeah, I must say I have a great sense for the strategy that Sweden has pursued in actually trying to mainstream or put gender equality into the mandates and into the specific relevant topics that the Security Council is discussing on situations, on geography, because that you will actually get impact on the ground. And then, of course, on the higher level, we have Norway has a very strong engagement for women, peace and security, most specifically by also trying to include women in peace processes. That's been one of our big flagship initiatives in the UN, and of course that's something we will continue to do. The government of Norway launched an action plan on women, peace and security just a month ago or so. We try to keep a very high profile on that issue, but in the actual work in the Council, it's much more useful to try to make it trickle down into the different work streams.
In Martin, again, you see this from a bit outside Scandinavia, where gender equality is extremely important. How successful would you say that Sweden and other countries who are concerned about this topic has been, and what are the possibilities to strengthen gender equality within the frame of the Security Council?
I think Sweden did exactly the right thing. At the early stages of discussion of women, peace and security, of children and armed conflict, of protection of civilians, it was useful to have general thematic discussions, but at the end of the day, what matters is whether that is reflected in individual operations, and that's what Sweden set out to effect. And I've been a special representative of the Secretary General heading a peace operation, more than one, and in that context you report to the Secretary General, but you also report to the Security Council, and you brief the Security Council, and you therefore have to think about what the Security Council cares about. If they come on a visit to your mission, you have to think about what questions they're going to ask. If you go in front of the Council and they read speeches drafted by junior diplomats to each other and don't put you on the spot about what you're actually doing on key aspects of your mandate, then you're in and out, and that's that. If you know that you're going to be pressed on what exactly you in the field are doing to implement part of the mandate that the Council's determined, then you're going to think a lot more between briefings as to how you advance that area of your work. So believe me, it matters, and the approach that Sweden took on that was right. The children armed conflict is another area. Sweden too made a great contribution there, but that now is not just a general matter, it's a matter of really close country monitoring and discussion, and that's the way the Council ought to exercise its responsibility for work in the field.
Next question. Before you get the floor, I just want to repeat the speakers list. I noticed the lady there and the lady sitting back, and I'm very soon going to close the speakers list because we're moving rapidly towards 9:15. So if you're going to come on, you have to give me a sign very quickly, please.
Thank you. My name is Tale Hungnes. I'm Policy Director in Amnesty International Norway. And I want to return, of course, to the issue of human rights and also follow up a little bit on the question from the student in the back. And my question goes to Mr. Holte. If you can be more specific on how Norway will use the seat in the UN Security Council to promote human rights. And I ask this question, of course, in confidence of your and also the government's engagement and commitment to human rights. But that it has been said that is also the case for the other two candidate countries. And in light of that, I would say that, for example, Canada has been, it's a strong country, it's a big country, and it is a country which has also been very outspoken, very explicit against, for example, the human rights violations in Saudi Arabia. And even more so than what Norway has been. So I would say the world needs that a brave and strong and outspoken country wins this run, and I would like you to accept the challenge of demonstrating that that country is Norway.
Well, that's a clear challenge, Jens.
Yes. Of course, human rights goes to the very core of our my party's foreign policy, the government's manifesto as well. And yesterday, Ine Eriksen Søreide held her annual or semi-annual foreign policy statement in the parliament. She was very clear that Norway will continue to promote human rights, but also to choose the right avenue of action for actually maximizing impact, for having an effect on what you're trying to achieve. So it's a very constant challenge to calibrate how you engage with other countries on human rights issues, because it can be quite complicated. Although we are, I mean, in our Security Council campaign, we're not changing our policies or the level of criticism. For instance, it's constant. Norway is a recognizable voice on human rights issues globally, and we intend to keep it that way. And when it comes to the work in the Council, it's going to be, I mean, there are, of course, different views on how you should include human rights language or statements in these mandates or in the discussions there. So it is a topic that will be important to us, but that we also need to engage with the other Council members in a constructive way, and hopefully we can get a lot of support with the elected members on promoting these issues. Yeah, that's maybe Efraim could weigh in on how you've been promoting.
I think the most important thing is to keep focus on the beneficiaries of the work of the Council. As I mentioned, they are people, persons, organizations in conflict or in risk. And so every action that you take must be geared towards supporting them and their rights to human rights, and their claim to human rights, I would say. Because on occasions you can be tempted to do things because you feel an urge to explain yourself towards the world and be a chief advocate, but you need to temper that with the results for the beneficiaries of the work of the Council. But on occasions you have to be outspoken, and I've not seen any example of Norway not speaking out and during its campaign phase, and I think that we approached it the same for us, Sweden, and so and I think this philosophy also with working with the partners in the Council will be very important, and I think Norway also stands a good chance of giving the institutions that are supposed to defend human rights in the UN also a clear role and voice, and that matters. If we can achieve that the High Commissioner for Human Rights regains her space in the Security Council, that will import a lot. But the importance also for us is to work, has been to work closely with Amnesty, with Human Rights Watch, and we did so in New York and followed their advice. And I think that the balance between us has been very positive.
Next question, please.
Yes, my name is Torun Tryggestad, and I'm the director of the PRIO Center on Gender, Peace and Security. So my question also relates a bit to what the two previous people asking questions addressed. The role that Norway can play as a more vocal member of the Security Council advancing this agenda. And Sweden has gained a lot of attention in recent years for its feminist foreign policy. And has been regarded as really a prominent leader, not least in civil society, among civil society groups. And in my own conversations with Norwegian diplomats, because Norway has a very similar profile to Sweden when it comes to actual policies. But in my conversations with Norwegian diplomats, they say they could never use the word feminist foreign policy or feminist policies, because it will probably close more doors than doors will be opened by using that kind of framing. Has this been your experience? Did you have to change your language while you were at the Security Council or during your campaign? It didn't seem like you had to do it, at least seen from the outside. And also to Ian, how much space is there really in the Security Council in the current climate to bring up controversial topics, to make yourself a bit unpopular?
Excellent questions. Just want to repeat that I have noticed you sitting in the back. I haven't noticed anybody else. I hope I haven't ignored anybody, because I'm going to close the speakers list now. Well, Efraim Gomez, you first.
Thanks. I mentioned this meeting of my Prime Minister with the African president, and he said that he was a feminist, and we were not entirely convinced about this. You know, from a sort of a civil servant level, you know, would it be really productive for us? But I think you should never excuse yourself, and you should always use the terms and labels and to identify yourselves in the way that you feel most comfortable with. naturally. It's irrespective of how you call yourself. And that has also been the philosophy between how we pursue the Women, Peace and Security agenda. We didn't call it the Feminist Foreign Policy agenda. We called it the Women, Peace and Security because it was an established term. But we pursued, to our understanding, a feminist foreign policy because we front-loaded with all of the ambitions and all of this integration and mainstreaming approach, and which we were intent on doing, sort of, and going for structural changes to the work to promote gender equality. And so it's up to every other country to define how they wish to label themselves.
Ian?
There's nothing to stop an elected member from pressing any issue that they want to in the council, but the key thing is that they've got to build alliances. At the end of the day, if something is going to be effective in the council, there've got to be at least 9 members of the council that have sufficient sympathy to move that aspect of the agenda. So speaking out is important, but what's important is members of the council working together, and a member of the council that wants to press an agenda, whether it's human rights, whether it's women, peace and security, gradually bringing with them other members. And what I find most encouraging about the dynamic in the council is the way in which elected members are increasingly, they've now agreed to share early drafts of things they want to put forward with each other. They're meeting monthly. They held a meeting in South Africa in November with the 10 members then and the 5 who were coming onto the council. Now, that doesn't bridge very real political differences amongst them, and their ideological differences are as great as those amongst the permanent 5. But there is now a commitment to work together and to try to find the areas where greater consensus can be found in the council. So that's encouraging, but one obviously has to, on women, peace and security, the rhetorical battle has been won. The language is there. The Secretary General is committed to gender parity in senior appointments and is doing it. Peacekeeping accepts there must be more women peacekeepers. Mediators accept that women must be at the peace table and so on. But it's not, of course, it's far from being realised in practice, and therefore it goes back to the kind of dogged pursuit of the agenda in every specific situation, not just around the table in New York, but when scrutinising what's going on in the field.
Jens, it's 8th of March in a couple of days. Would you be comfortable saying that Norway has a feminist foreign policy?
Yeah, I mean, people can use labels in any way you want. And if you like to use the label? Yeah, the policies. I mean, the policies we pursue. I mean, nationally and globally are feminist. It's true, but I mean, as our Prime Minister has said, let people use labels. That's okay. I'm more interested in doing the feminist things than using labels. And I mean, we have a very big international engagement also on development policy when it comes to promoting gender equality. We have a female Prime Minister, Finance Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs. So I think, she's more into doing feminism.
Final question.
Hi, my name is Mahal Teresa. I'm also an international relations student. I understand that the panelists are quite positive to membership, and that's also why I want to ask you, what's the biggest downfall for Norway becoming a Security Council member besides costs?
Well, that's an excellent final question. I think you can have 90 seconds to answer that. And any final remarks you have? We can start with you, Efraim Gomez. What was the biggest downfall for Sweden being a member?
Well, the biggest downfall is, of course, that in today's world, where the trends are so discouraging, a good result might be that the world is not turning into a worse place than it already is. So psychologically, it's very frustrating to sit on the Security Council. But it would probably be a worse place, as I mentioned, if countries such as Sweden and Norway and like-minded to us did not sit on the Council. So that's the biggest downfall, that you feel frustration, I would say. But you need to rest also on your achievements, and that hopefully you're able to reverse some of those negative trends. Women, peace and security, one of those. But there are some where the battle is very long, and you will feel frustration. The impingement on international law and international humanitarian law in the name of counterterrorism is one of those, and it's poised to increase. And the same for climate change and security. But you need to do your part in reversing those trends too.
Ian, Martin, some
I think
final
that's
thoughts?
very well said. I don't think there's a downside. There's frustration for sure, but unless you're really an isolationist, I don't think there's a downside.
Jens, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, politically, it's obviously a downside if we fail to achieve the things that we say we want to do when we get into the council. And of course, there's a lot of debate on the relevance of the council. You've seen all these horrible situations, the Security Council unable to get to agreement on solving extremely horrible situations, and that's it's going to be. I mean, we go into this candidacy wanting to solve difficult situations, and if you fail to do so, it's obviously something that we're not happy with. But on the other hand, we need to engage the world as it is and take that as our starting position and work very hard to get to some better positions.
Can I compliment?
Yes,
There's
sure.
a downfall for people like Jens and your prime minister and your foreign minister. They will get angry calls from upset permanent members, not the least. But that just testifies to your good work in the council.
Before we give a warm round of applause, let me end by informing you of two coming Civita events. There's been some talk about gender equality here. Tomorrow we are going to be together with the Noble Center, having brave activists from the Middle East, how women voices are changing in the Middle East, 6 o'clock at the Noble Center. And also tomorrow, our Prime Minister is going to share her thoughts on gender equality, feminism in a conversation with Civita leader Kristin Clemet. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to the panel. Have a great day.